throwaway account because a few people involved use Reddit. I never thought I'd be the guy posting in a relationship advice subreddit. I've spent years reading stories like this, silently judging people for ignoring obvious red flags. I'd think, how could you not see what was happening? Turns out it's incredibly easy when you're the one living inside the relationship. I don't even know if I'm looking for advice anymore. Maybe I just need to get this out of my head before it drives me insane. My wife, Emily, 32F, and I, 34M, have been married for 6 years and together for almost 10. If you'd asked me a year ago to describe our marriage, I would have said it was complicated. If you asked me today, I'd probably say it was built on lies, and I'm only now realizing how many there were. Emily has always had a difficult personality. She's smart, funny when she wants to be, and incredibly charming around other people. Friends adore her. My parents think she's wonderful. Coworkers constantly tell me how lucky I am. They don't see the version I come home to. The Emily I know can turn a simple conversation into an argument in under 30 seconds. If I forgot to buy milk, she'd tell me I clearly didn't care about this family. If I worked late, she'd accuse me of avoiding her. If I wanted one quiet evening to watch football, she'd somehow make it about how emotionally unavailable I was. And every single disagreement followed the same pattern. She'd yell. I'd defend myself. She'd deny saying things she'd literally said 5 minutes earlier. Then somehow I'd end up apologizing. Looking back, I don't know how many times I accepted blame just because I was too exhausted to keep fighting. The lying bothered me even more. Not huge lies. Tiny ones. Pointless ones. She'd tell me she hadn't ordered food when I could literally see the delivery bag. She'd claim she hadn't spoken to her ex despite me hearing his name during a phone call. She once insisted she'd been home all afternoon, even though our Ring camera clearly showed her leaving around noon. When I'd confront her, she'd always have some ridiculous explanation. The timestamp is wrong. You misunderstood. You're imagining things. I never said that. Eventually, I stopped questioning everything because it was mentally draining. Maybe that's exactly what she wanted. Last Tuesday, she walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee. I'm going to visit my mom this weekend. I didn't think much of it. Her mother lives about 4 hours away by car. Emily visits her every couple of months. Okay, I said. Drive safe. She looked almost disappointed. You don't care? What? You didn't even ask why. I figured you wanted to see your mom. She rolled her eyes. Forget it. That should have been my first clue something was off. Over the next few days, she became strangely protective of her phone. Again, she'd flip it face down whenever I entered the room. Take it into the bathroom. Sleep with it under her pillow. Normally I'd mention it. This time I stayed quiet. Friday morning, she packed a small suitcase. I'll probably stay until Sunday evening. I kissed her goodbye. She barely kissed me back. Then she left. About 2 hours later, my boss called. A client meeting scheduled in Chicago had been canceled because their office had a power outage. I'd already taken the day off, so suddenly I had nothing to do. Around noon, my younger sister texted me asking if I could pick up our dad from the airport because she'd gotten stuck at work. Sure. No problem. Our local airport is only 25 minutes away. I grabbed my keys and headed over. If I hadn't agreed to pick up my dad, none of this would have happened. His flight was delayed. I was standing near the baggage claim scrolling through my phone when I looked up. I almost didn't recognize her. Emily wasn't dressed the way she normally dresses to visit family. She wasn't wearing jeans and sneakers. She had on a fitted black dress. Her hair was professionally styled. She looked like she was going on vacation. Then I saw the man standing beside her. Tall, maybe early 40s. Expensive watch. Well-fitted navy blazer. The kind of guy who clearly spends money on his appearance. They weren't standing far apart. They were standing close. Really close. He leaned toward her. She laughed. Not the fake polite laugh she gives strangers. The genuine laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I froze. At first my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it was her cousin. Maybe an old family friend. Maybe. Then he placed his hand on the small of her back. She didn't move away. Instead, she rested her head against his shoulder for just a second. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sexual. It was comfortable. Familiar. Like people who've done it 100 times. My stomach dropped. I ducked behind a pillar before she could see me. I have no idea why. Instinct, I guess. I peeked around the corner. They weren't heading toward baggage claim. They were walking toward the departure gates. Departure, not arrivals. That's when it hit me. Her mother lives 4 hours away. Why would she be at the airport? She'd told me she was driving. Nothing made sense. I watched them check in together at a self-service kiosk. Together, the machine printed 2 boarding passes. The man handed one to Emily. She smiled. Then, completely naturally, she slipped her arm through his. I felt physically sick. I wanted to walk over. I wanted to demand an explanation. Instead, I took out my phone. I started recording. Not because I had some master plan. Because I knew if I confronted her later, she'd deny every second of what I'd seen. I recorded nearly 3 minutes. Them laughing, talking, walking through security together. At one point, she reached up and adjusted his collar. Something wives do. Not strangers. Not coworkers. Not cousins. When they disappeared beyond security, I just stood there. I don't know how long. Eventually, my dad called. I'm outside. I had completely forgotten why I'd come. The drive home was surreal. Dad talked about his business trip. I nodded at random moments. I don't remember a single thing he said. The entire time I kept replaying the video. Over and over and over. By the time I got home, I'd convinced myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe they were co-workers flying to a conference. Maybe she'd lied because she thought I'd get jealous. Maybe. Then I checked our joint credit card account. One transaction immediately stood out. 2 airline tickets. Purchased 3 weeks earlier. Almost $2,400. Destination. Maui. Not her mother's town. Not even the same state. Hawaii. My hands started shaking. Emily hadn't just lied about visiting her mom. She'd secretly planned an expensive vacation with another man, using money from our joint account. I called her. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. 5 minutes later she texted. Driving. Can't talk. Love you. Driving. I stared at the message for almost a minute. Then I looked back at the video sitting on my phone. She wasn't driving. She was 30,000 feet above the Pacific by then. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst lie I was about to uncover. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily smiling at that man in the airport. Not the forced smile she'd been giving me for months, the genuine one. The one I'd almost forgotten she had. I wanted to call her again. I wanted to send her the video and ask one simple question. Who is he? Instead, I did nothing. For the first time in years, I ignored my emotions and forced myself to think. Emily had one habit that had saved her countless arguments over the years. She always counted on me reacting immediately. The second I got angry, she'd turn the conversation around. Why are you spying on me? You're so insecure. You always assume the worst. Then somehow I'd end up apologizing for questioning her. Not this time. If I confronted her now, she'd invent another story before I had the facts. So I decided to wait. Saturday morning, she texted me. Mom says hi. We're making pancakes. I stared at the message. I almost laughed. Less than 24 hours earlier, I'd watched her board a flight to Hawaii. Now she was pretending to be eating breakfast 4 states away. I replied with one word. Nice. A few minutes later, another message arrived. Everything okay? She was checking whether I suspected anything. I simply answered. Just tired. That seemed to satisfy her. The rest of the weekend, I became someone I never thought I'd be. An investigator. I wasn't hacking accounts or following GPS signals. I was simply looking at things I'd ignored for years. I logged into our online banking. Nothing unusual at first. Mortgage. Utilities. Groceries. Then I expanded the transaction history back 6 months. Patterns started appearing. Small withdrawals. Luxury restaurants. Boutique hotels. Wine bars. None of them were places we'd gone together. Individually, they weren't suspicious. Together, they painted a picture. I exported everything into a spreadsheet. The dates matched almost perfectly with days Emily had claimed she was working late or meeting friends. My chest tightened. Then I checked our shared credit card rewards. The airline tickets weren't the only travel expense. There was also a reservation at an upscale oceanfront resort. 1 room, 7 nights. Paid in full. Almost $5,000. I knew we hadn't taken a vacation in over 2 years because Emily always insisted money was tight. Apparently, it wasn't. Just not for me. Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. Emily. I took a deep breath before answering. Hey, I said. Hi, babe. She sounded relaxed. Happy. How's your mom? Oh, she's doing okay. Her back has been bothering her. Another lie. She continued effortlessly. We might go to a farmer's market later. I looked at the weather app. Sunny in Hawaii. Heavy rain where her mother actually lived. I almost pointed that out. Instead, I asked, Send her my love. I will. No hesitation. No guilt. Nothing. We talked for another 5 minutes about completely ordinary things. Dinner. Laundry. Whether we needed groceries. When the call ended, I realized something that hurt even more than the affair. She wasn't nervous. She'd lied so many times that this conversation felt normal to her. Monday evening she came home, dragging the same suitcase she'd left with. The second she walked through the front door, she wrapped her arms around me. I missed you. For a split second, I almost believed her. Then I smelled sunscreen. Not the cheap kind. The expensive tropical coconut scent she'd never worn before. You okay? She asked. You seem quiet. Long weekend. She studied my face carefully, almost like she was searching for evidence. Finally, she smiled. I brought you something. She reached into her bag and handed me a small box of homemade fudge. My mom insisted. I accepted it without saying anything. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I looked at the label. The candy shop was located less than 10 miles from her mother's house. At first, I thought she'd actually visited her mother after returning from Hawaii. Then I noticed the expiration sticker. The fudge had been packaged over a month earlier. She hadn't bought it this weekend. She'd bought it weeks ago. She had planned this lie in advance. That realization hit harder than anything else. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake. This was preparation, planning, rehearsal. The next morning, another surprise arrived. My phone buzzed while I was at work. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Hello. A woman's voice answered. Is this Daniel? Yes. My name is Sarah. I didn't recognize the name. I think we need to talk. My stomach immediately tightened. I'm sorry, who are you? There was a long pause. Then she quietly said, I believe our spouses are having an affair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I honestly thought it was some kind of prank. My husband is Michael. The name meant nothing to me. I found hotel receipts, she continued. Then yesterday, I noticed a charge for a resort in Maui. I called the hotel pretending to confirm our reservation. She swallowed hard. They told me Mr. Michael Carter had already checked in with Emily. The room suddenly felt too small. Sarah wasn't guessing. She had a name. Michael. The man from the airport finally had won. I don't know if you believe me, she said. I do. The words came out before I could think. I saw them together. Silence. Then I heard her crying. Not loud. Just quiet, exhausted tears. We agreed to meet the following afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Neither of us wanted revenge. Neither of us wanted drama. We just wanted the truth. As I hung up, I looked at the framed wedding photo sitting on my desk. Emily was smiling at me in that picture. Now all I could think was one terrifying question. If she'd been lying this convincingly for months, what else had I never questioned? I got to the coffee shop 20 minutes early. Part of me hoped Sarah wouldn't show up. Not because I didn't believe her, but because if she did, everything would become real. Up until then, I could still tell myself there was some bizarre explanation waiting around the corner. There wasn't. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman in her early 30s walked in. She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her eyes were puffy, and she carried a folder instead of a purse. Daniel? She asked. I nodded. Sarah. We shook hands awkwardly before sitting down. Neither of us touched our coffee. For almost a minute, we just stared at the table. Finally, she slid the folder toward me. I don't know where to start. Inside were printed bank statements, hotel invoices, restaurant receipts, and screenshots of text message notifications. One hotel receipt caught my attention immediately. 3 months ago, downtown Boston. 2 guests. The reservation had been made under Michael's name. Emily had told me she was attending a weekend leadership seminar for work that same weekend. I remembered it clearly because she'd spent an entire week complaining about how boring it was going to be. There had never been a seminar. Sarah pointed to another receipt. This one was 6 months ago. Miami. Then another. Denver. Seattle. Austin. The dates lined up almost perfectly with Emily's so-called business trips. I looked up. How long have you suspected? Sarah let out a bitter laugh. I suspected something 6 months ago. I just couldn't prove it. What changed? She reached into her folder again and handed me a photograph. It was Michael and Emily sitting together at an outdoor restaurant. Neither of them noticed whoever had taken the picture. They looked comfortable, relaxed, like a real couple. When did you take this? I asked. I didn't. A private investigator did. I blinked. You hired one. She nodded. I felt guilty about it at first. Then she looked directly at me. I don't anymore. The investigator had followed Michael for 4 days. He documented lunches, hotels, shopping trips, long walks through parks. Nothing explicit, no dramatic kissing, no obvious displays of affection. But it didn't matter. People in secret relationships often know better than to be reckless in public. The report reached one unavoidable conclusion. Michael and Emily were spending large amounts of time together while lying to their spouses. I rubbed my temples. I don't understand. What? Why stay married? Sarah sighed. I've been asking myself that every day. Neither of us had an answer. When I got home that evening, Emily was making dinner. She smiled when I walked into the kitchen. Perfect timing. The smell of garlic filled the room. Normally, I'd have hugged her from behind. Instead, I stood several feet away. She noticed. You okay? Just a rough day. Work? Something like that. She shrugged and went back to stirring the pasta. Watching her act completely normal was surreal. Did she rehearse this? Did she stand in hotel rooms with Michael discussing what lies she'd tell me when she got home? Or was deception simply second nature by now? That night, after she fell asleep, I quietly unlocked her laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but I also wasn't interested in pretending trust still existed. Most of her files were ordinary. Work documents, photos, recipes. Then I noticed a folder labeled taxes. Inside was another folder. Hidden. No name. Just a period at the beginning. I opened it. My pulse quickened. Hundreds of photos. Most were innocent. Landscapes. Restaurants. Sunsets. Then I found one that made my stomach turn. Emily and Michael standing on a beach. Not holding hands. Not kissing. Just smiling at the camera with matching flower lays around their necks. Behind them was the exact resort I'd seen on the credit card statement. The photo metadata showed it had been taken less than 48 hours earlier. She'd forgotten to delete it. I copied the folder onto a flash drive. As I was about to close the laptop, a notification popped up. A messaging app. One new message. From someone saved as M. I froze. The preview read, "Miss you already." 3 dots appeared. Another message. "He suspects anything?" Emily shifted slightly in bed. I immediately closed the laptop. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she'd wake up. She didn't. The next morning, she was unusually cheerful. Almost affectionate. She kissed me before work. Made my lunch. Texted me during the day. It was like she was trying to be the perfect wife. I wondered if Michael's message meant they'd started worrying. Or maybe this was simply guilt. Either way, it felt fake. That afternoon, Sarah called again. I found something. What? My investigator looked into Michael's business records. And he owns a small consulting company. So, he hired Emily. I frowned. What do you mean? Not as an employee. She took a deep breath. As a contractor. I opened my laptop while we talked. Sure enough, public records showed Michael's company had paid an independent consultant named Emily Harper over $90,000 during the last 2 years. $90,000. I had never heard of this job. Emily always claimed she worked exclusively for her marketing firm. So they weren't just having an affair, I said quietly. No. Sarah sounded just as shaken. They've been financially connected for years. Years. That word echoed in my head. Not months. Years. Suddenly, dozens of strange memories resurfaced. The unexplained cash deposits. The expensive handbag she said was on sale. The designer shoes she claimed were a birthday gift from a coworker. The jewelry I never questioned because she always had an explanation. Every explanation now sounded ridiculous. That evening, I made one more phone call. Emily's mother answered after the second ring. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Linda. We chatted for a minute. Then I casually asked, did Emily have fun visiting this weekend? Silence. Long enough to make my stomach sink. What visit? I closed my eyes. She told me she spent the weekend with you. Another pause. Honey, I haven't seen Emily in almost 4 months. There it was. Confirmation. Not from a receipt. Not from a photograph. From her own mother. Linda sounded genuinely confused. I didn't tell her the truth. I couldn't. Not yet. We ended the call a minute later. I sat alone in the living room, staring at nothing. The affair wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't even a theory. It was a fact. But one question still haunted me. If Emily had been living this double life for years, was I ever really her husband? Or was I just the man paying half the bills while someone else got the version of her I fell in love with? Daniel spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Not for revenge. For freedom. His attorney gave him one piece of advice that overrode everything else. Don't confront her until you've protected yourself. So he quietly opened a separate bank account, redirected his paycheck, copied every financial record he could legally access, and photographed valuable items inside the house. Sarah was doing the same. One Friday afternoon she called. I found something. You sound different. I am. She emailed him a PDF. It was a property record. Michael had purchased a condominium 18 months earlier through an LLC. Daniel almost closed the document before noticing the mailing address attached to the company. It wasn't Michael's home. It wasn't his office. It was a mailbox. Sarah had already traced it. The condo wasn't being rented. Someone had been paying the utilities every month. Electricity, water, internet. Daniel's eyes stopped on another name listed as an emergency contact. Emily Harper. Neither spouse had known the apartment existed. They drove there together the following morning. The building overlooked a small marina. Modern, quiet, anonymous. Exactly the kind of place nobody would question. They didn't go inside. Instead, they sat in Daniel's car across the street. At 10:17 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the garage. Michael stepped out. A few minutes later, Emily arrived in a rideshare. She smiled the second she saw him. They hugged. Not awkwardly. Not like people hiding an affair. Like two people coming home. Sarah quietly wiped away tears. I think this is where they've really been living. Daniel couldn't argue. For almost an hour they watched the windows. Eventually the curtains opened. Emily walked onto the balcony, holding a coffee mug. She was laughing. Daniel hadn't seen that expression directed at him in years. Oddly, the anger disappeared. In its place came something colder. Acceptance. That evening, he packed a suitcase. Emily was supposed to return from another girls' dinner around 9. Instead of waiting, he left copies of everything on the dining room table. The airline receipt, the resort invoice, screenshots of the messages, photos from the hidden folder, the bank transfers, and one handwritten note. I know about Hawaii. I know about Michael. I know about the condo. My lawyer will contact you next week. Please don't contact me unless it's through our attorneys. At 9:42 p.m., his phone exploded. 23 missed calls. Voicemails. Texts. Emily. This isn't what you think. Emily. Answer me. Emily. Who has been lying to you? Emily. You're making a huge mistake. Finally. Emily. I can explain everything. Daniel looked at the screen for a long time. Then he locked the phone. For years, every argument had ended with him chasing explanations. This time, he didn't need one. The evidence had already said everything. A week later, Sarah filed for divorce. Daniel did the same. Months passed. The legal process was exhausting, but the emotional weight slowly became lighter. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes, Daniel found a framed photo from the first year of his marriage. He looked happy. Emily looked happy too. Maybe some of it had been real. Maybe it hadn't. He realized it no longer mattered. The marriage ended the day trust disappeared, not the day he saw her at the airport. The airport was simply the moment he finally saw the truth. Months later, Sarah met him for coffee. Neither of them talked much about Emily or Michael anymore. Life had moved forward. As they walked out of the cafe, Sarah smiled. You know what's strange? What? I thought losing him would be the hardest part. And she looked toward the parking lot. No, believing his lies was. Daniel nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes healing doesn't begin when someone apologizes. It begins when you stop waiting for one. The divorce wasn't dramatic. At least, not in the way people imagine. There were no screaming matches in court. No one threw wedding rings across a room. There wasn't a final scene where Emily admitted everything and begged for another chance. Real life wasn't that cinematic. It was paperwork, deadlines, lawyers charging by the hour, boxes being packed in silence. The first time Daniel saw Emily after moving out was during a mediation session. She looked almost exactly the same. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. For a brief moment, he wondered if he'd imagined the whole nightmare. Then she spoke. I still don't understand why you couldn't talk to me before filing. He stared at her. After everything she had done, she still wanted to frame herself as the victim. I tried talking to you for years, he replied calmly. You just preferred lying. She looked offended. I made mistakes. Daniel almost laughed. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary. Booking a vacation with another man and lying about it for years isn't a mistake. Emily folded her arms. You've already decided I'm the villain. No, Daniel said quietly. You decided that every time you looked me in the eye and lied. For the first time since they met, she had no response. A month later, Sarah called. The divorce is final. So is mine. There was a long silence. How are you holding up? Daniel looked around his small apartment. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't the house he'd imagined growing old in. But it was peaceful. I still have bad days, he admitted. But they're becoming less frequent. Sarah laughed softly. I think that's called healing. 3 months later, Daniel received one final email from Emily. No accusations. No legal questions. Just a single paragraph. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that. He read it twice, then closed it. There was no anger anymore. Only distance. He never replied. Not because he wanted revenge. Because some conversations belong in the past. Nearly a year after the airport, Daniel happened to run into an old mutual friend. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, the friend hesitated before saying, I heard Emily and Michael broke up. Daniel wasn't surprised. People willing to betray someone to be together often spend the rest of the relationship wondering if they'll be betrayed again. Trust is difficult to build, almost impossible to rebuild after deception. He wished them no harm, but he also felt no satisfaction. Their relationship was no longer his concern. Looking back, Daniel realized the affair hadn't destroyed his marriage. The dishonesty had. The affair was only the symptom. The real damage came from hundreds of small lies that slowly replaced honesty with suspicion. He remembered all the moments he'd ignored because they seemed too insignificant. The unnecessary lies. The constant blame. The way every disagreement somehow became his fault. The feeling that he had to apologize just to restore peace. At the time, he'd convinced himself that every marriage went through difficult phases. Now he understood the difference. Healthy relationships survive disagreements. They don't survive chronic deception. If someone reading this is going through something similar, here's what I wish I'd known sooner. First, don't ignore patterns just because each individual incident seems small. One lie can be a mistake. A consistent pattern of lies is a choice. Second, if every conflict ends with you apologizing, even when you started with a reasonable concern, pay attention. Healthy partners discuss problems. Manipulative partners make you question your own reality. Third, gather facts before making life-changing decisions. Acting in anger rarely helps. Knowing the truth does. Fourth, don't isolate yourself. Whether it's trusted friends, family, or a therapist, having someone grounded to talk to can keep you from doubting yourself. Finally, remember that losing a relationship built on dishonesty is not the same as losing a healthy relationship. It hurts, and grief is real. But peace often begins the moment you stop trying to hold together something the other person has already abandoned. It's been 2 years now. I don't think about the airport every day anymore. Sometimes an airplane flies overhead, and I remember that afternoon. Not with rage, not even with sadness, just gratitude. Because if my dad's flight hadn't been delayed, if I hadn't agreed to pick him up, if I hadn't looked up at exactly the right moment, I might have spent years believing a lie. Instead, I got the truth. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the beginning I needed.